All right, tonight you can turn with me to the book of Exodus in the Old Testament if you want to. Exodus chapter 3, we're going to be reading tonight. I think we're going to, as we go through our lesson and our discussion, we'll read the scriptures as we go a little at a time. So we'll get to that in a minute. I want to do a little bit of introduction and a little bit of review from last week. We started this just last week. Last Wednesday, we began this study of the nature of God. What is God like? Everybody wants to know God, or I hope they do. What is he like? We've got to know what he's like. We can learn much about God from the book of Exodus and from the story of God dealing with his people, Israel. You see, God was saving a nation, Israel, out of slavery. The nation of Israel had been in Egypt for 430 years. While in Egypt, once the generation that brought the original group in, once that original generation died out, a new Pharaoh came into power who knew nothing of how much Joseph had spared the nation of Egypt with his knowledge from God from the great famine that came. So they had no appreciation. And the Pharaoh said, well, these Hebrew people that are living among us are growing and multiplying greatly. They'll become so big and so powerful, they'll walk away and leave us. And so they made slaves out of them. So the nation of Israel lived as slaves for 430 years in Egypt, where they were subjected to Egypt's way of living and believing. Well, the Egyptians practiced all kinds of idolatry. For instance, the Egyptians worshiped the crocodile from the Nile River. They thought that the crocodile was a god. In fact, you can go back in your study, the 10 plagues that fell upon Egypt were attacks on Egypt's gods, the various gods that they believed. They believed almost in anything. They were almost like the Hindus. And so much of their practices also were some of the same practices that the evil nations that were in Canaan practiced, the Hivites and the Jebusites and the Perizzites and the Amorites. Immorality was part of their religious practice. And so God is saving this nation. They've heard about God from their ancestors, but they didn't know who he was. They didn't know what he was like. So God had to introduce himself to the people and teach them his ways. How can you teach the ways of God in one lesson? How can they say, all right, we're going to have a 1-hour class and we'll teach you everything you need to know about God. You just follow all that and that's it. They had to learn through trial and error just like you and I have. I've had to learn for 66 and a half years, and how much longer I live, I'll have to learn that much more the rest of my life, how to walk with God and who God is. So they knew nothing about God, only that he was the God of their forefathers, of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Those three patriarchs were the pinnacles. They were the three pillars of Hebrew life and Hebrew faith. So God was going to teach them about himself, and the first thing that God did was to choose a person from among the Hebrew people who he would call to lead the people out of slavery. He called Moses. Well, Moses wasn't even in Egypt at the time. He was away in the land of Midian, which is in Saudi Arabia. And so what he did was he introduced himself to Moses first, told Moses what he had in mind, and that's what we read about last week. And we're actually going to jump back in that story tonight and continue with the conversation. Because there were basically 5 essential things. There are many more things about God, but the first 5 essential things that God pointed out to Moses about himself was this, from the things that he said to him. First of all, he let Moses know he is a holy God, unlike the gods in Egypt, unlike the gods of the wicked nations that were back in Canaan that they even didn't know anything about. They didn't even know how to get there. So God told Moses, he said, you take your shoes off, you're on holy ground. And he began to reveal to him his holy character and how we are to reverence him and to speak reverently about him and to treat him that way and to show him honor and dignity. Fall prostrate, not prostrate's what goes wrong in your body, prostrates where you fall out on your face before God. He's holy. Not only that, but he is eternal Lord. He told Moses, I'm the God of your fathers, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. The same God that they worshiped over 400 years ago. In fact, by then it was over 500 years ago when you get back to Abraham. Not only is he eternal Lord, but he taught Moses that he knows everything. For he said, I have looked down and I have seen Israel's suffering. I know about that. Not only that, but he said, I am concerned. That's the fourth thing about God that he wanted Moses to know. I am concerned. I care that Israel is being mistreated as a slave in Egypt. And then finally, I have come down, he cares enough to rescue them. And we related it to the gospel, to John 3:16. God knows. He loves the world so much that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever would believe in him would not perish but have everlasting life. God rescues us from sin through his Son, Jesus Christ. So he was telling Moses, I'm going to use you to rescue the nation. All right, that's kind of the conclusion to what we read last week in the first 10 verses of Exodus 3. Tonight we're going to pick up that conversation where we stopped, and I want to point out 6 more things about God that God revealed to Moses. So if you want to turn, if you've already turned to Exodus 3, we're going to read verses 11 through 22, and as I said, we're going to read it as we go. That being said, a couple more things to tell you. Many things about God are still a mystery to us. Is anybody here that knows everything about God? I didn't think so. You ask me, I don't know. We only know what he has chosen to reveal to us. If he always has been and always will be, he created everything. He even knows your insides. He knew where Jonah was. He talked to Jonah when he was in the belly of a whale in the bottom of the ocean. That tells you something. If you're stuck in a cave somewhere, he's there with you. In fact, the psalmist said, where can I go that you're not, Lord? So he praised God for the fact that anywhere he goes, he said, if I make my bed in hell, you're there. Anywhere I go. So many things are still a mystery to us. But there's more, that even though a lot of things are mysterious, there are more things that he does want us to know, encouraging things. And that's what we're going to talk about. That's the topic. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and put it up for you, the title, Encouragements from God. That's the title of our topic tonight. I want to point out from this text 6 more encouragements from God that you and I can know and learn. Last week when we stopped, one of the last things in verse 10 God said is, I'm going to call you, Moses, to go to Pharaoh. You're going to go to the children of Israel first and tell them, perform the signs for them, tell them I care about them, and that I'm going to lead them out of slavery back to the land of Canaan, the land flowing with milk and honey. And you, Moses, are going to go to Pharaoh. Y'all remember, what had Moses been doing for the last 40 years? He had been shepherding, but why was he shepherding for 40? He was hiding from Pharaoh. Now, in the conversation, he told him, the Pharaoh who was after you, he's dead now. You don't have to worry about him. But at first thought that he's sending him before Pharaoh, I'm sure fear went through Moses' mind. Pharaoh's already vowed to kill me. And he wants me to go back to Pharaoh and speak to him and say, let my people Israel go. So he was stunned to hear that God wanted him in delivering Israel from slavery. He had no confidence. So God had to explain more to Moses and encourage him. Before we start reading, let me ask you a question. And this is how it applies to us in our everyday life. Why do people who are taking on a new role need encouraging? If you've got to take on a new role in your career, in your family, whatever's going on with you, your schooling, why do we need to encourage him? All right, it's scary. And why is it scary? Something we've never done before. All right, help me take it a little bit further. Encouragement will help build our confidence to try it, won't it, Edward? Exactly. What else? Why do we need encouragement on something like that new? Fear of the unknown. Terry, what did you tell me the first time I asked you about being a Sunday school teacher? And why did you think I'd lost my mind to ask you to be a teacher? You've never done that before, to start with, right? Okay. Yes. And calmed you down. All right, you just describe how Moses felt. Depend upon God just as you said you did. All right, anybody else? Why do we need encouraging? You know, we've named some of them. It's a big challenge because you know your own inexperience, the fear of failure, not wanting to do the wrong thing or to offend somebody, feelings of inadequacy. So everybody needs to be encouraged in order to do the things that God asks us to do. I could ask others of you, what was it like when you took on especially if you had to take on a challenge of leadership? I bet the first day you went in, you're shaking in your boots. Were you, Shauna? Being a principal of a school. And I remember I used to watch her when she played ball. So you see, God can do more than we think possible in any way through us if we'll answer the bell, answer the call. Kendall Riley, now he's known as one of the greatest teachers in this class, and he was scared to death. People can't wait. When can I get into that class? They say. All right, I'm being a little bit facetious here. All right. Now, I'm not lying. Some people say, well, yeah, I want to go to his class. All right, 6 encouragements. I want you to look with me verses 11 through 12. That's 2 verses of Exodus 3. And here's the first point tonight about encouragements from God. You need to take encouragement that God is always present with you. All right, let's read. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and that I should bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? So he said, this is God saying, we're going to stop at 12a here, by the way. He said, I will certainly be with you, and this shall be a sign to you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. All right. Take encouragement from the fact that God has promised. What's one of the last things Jesus said to his disciples before he ascended back into heaven? You remember what he said? Lo, I'm with you always to the end of the age. So even though you can't see me, he said, I'm with you. through the Holy Spirit, he was with them always, even to the end of the age. Moses' first excuse why he should not lead Israel was, who am I to be a leader? I'm not qualified to be a leader, he said. Moses is saying, where's my ability or my status? I don't have any status to approach Pharaoh for Egypt. Moses was afraid of the job. He didn't want to be a failure. He could see a lot of things that would go wrong with him taking on this job that God said he wanted him to do. Let me ask this question. When do people fear their job? When do you fear your job? If you don't know about it, you say, I don't know about this. Because we think, well, I don't have enough knowledge for it. What else? Anything else? Why do people fear their job? That's so true. They do. Anything else? Why do people fear their job? Is anybody in here that likes change to your routine, to what you're comfortable with? I don't. Nobody likes change. That's why I would counsel young preachers, when you take the job of pastor a church, just get to know them first. Don't come in there and show them how you're going to deliver them out of all the things they've been doing wrong. That's the first way to be rejected. We don't like change. We want things that we know and we're comfortable with. Why do people fear the responsibility for leading? I'm sorry? We don't want to make mistakes. What else? Sure. Does anybody here likes making people mad at you or likes disappointing people or being criticized? Anybody like criticism? I don't know of anybody that likes it. Now, there's some that'll put up a front and say, oh, yeah, go on and say it. I can take it. I don't care. And there might be some instances where they don't care. But most people want to be liked, don't want to be confrontational. There are some people I know who love a good confrontation. In fact, they like a good fight. But what did God say to Moses? Nothing to fear here. I'll be with you. Here's the problem. Moses has just met God. He doesn't know if there's nothing to fear or not. He had all kinds of things he could conjure up in his mind and imagine might happen. He didn't know God's character and he didn't know God's dependability. So when God says, I'll be with you, well, that sounds good, but are you going to be with me when they slap me? And, you know, a lot of things went wrong. From the beginning, you remember Pharaoh took away their straw to make bricks and said, I'm going to expect you to make bricks even more. And then he made it harder on the Israelites. What happened when things got tougher? They complained to Moses. It's your fault. Why did you do this to us? So there's all these reasons that we should fear things, and all this was a test. So another question. Why should God's presence encourage us to accept big challenges? How many here have found God to be faithful in anything? Everybody, I hope, have experienced something until you've been up against a wall and been afraid for your life, feared what's going to, and then he brought you through. That's when you know he is faithful. Every one of you could share something with me about that, of how he has got you through a difficult situation. You didn't know what you were going to do, what was going to happen, but he proved himself. He's always present with you. That's exactly right. It is in those crisis moments, you know, that's when your close friendships and bonds, when you go through something with somebody else, That's when you're really knit together and learn to love and appreciate them because they've proven themselves dependent. God proves himself dependable. All right, a second encouragement. God gives us encouraging signs to assure us of his call and his purpose in our life. Verse 12, back up again. We read it, and I want to read it again now, just for this point in mind. So he said, I will certainly be with you, and this shall be a sign. In other words, I'm going to show you how I'll be with you. This will be a sign to you that I've sent you. When you brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. You remember, he was on Mount Horeb with a flock of sheep or goats, whatever. Maybe he had some of both. I don't know. When God called him, and he said, so here he is out at Horeb. Horeb was a long way from Egypt. So he's telling him ahead of time, when you leave Egypt with the people of Israel and come, you're going to come to this mountain and worship me. That's a sign for you that you'll see I'm always there with you. So he's promised signs, things that you'll see that happen. Now, when do you get to see a sign? When does a sign take place? When you need help? Are they instant? When you least expect them? It's somewhere down the road that the sign takes place. When you get through it, yes, that was the sign. Now I know what he said was the way it is. So God says, I'm giving you a sign so you can know that I'm sending you. All right, here's a question for us. When do we need to know that God is speaking to us? When do you need to know it? Definitely, that's a time when we need it, isn't it? When else? In the beginning, we need to know it, didn't it? Are there other times? What if you're right in the middle of the crisis? That's when you definitely need to know, isn't it? Anybody remember in the New Testament, the Apostle Paul, and all the threats were against him? And he said, the Lord appeared to me at night and said, Paul, be of good cheer, because there's a bunch more things I've got in store for you down the road. This is not going to be your end right here. Those were encouraging things. He heard a message, a sign from God that there was still more to do. Don't fear about this. Yeah. Yes. I think that's a good point too. Many years ago when I was a boy and we lived in Kentucky, my dad loved to fish, and I went with him some, and people in the community, this guy that became his fishing buddy at the church where he pastored, we went to Lake Cumberland below Wolf Creek Dam, very similar like below Center Hill Dam here, trout fishing. Well, Center Hill Dam had started to leak, and they had repair people there working on that dam, pouring concrete, putting in rocks. And Krez Covington, he's now long gone, but anyway, he was one of these panicky guys, and he was saying, we get out here in this water, I'll cut this anchor, and we'll crank that boat, and we'll get away before that flood gets us. And then we were camped out in the campground that was below the dam, and my dad flippantly said, oh, don't worry about it. That dam's not going to die. I'm not going to bust. I'm not ready to die yet. God's still got more for me to do. Well, he said joking, our time could come. That's when he was young and foolish like I have been, so many years ago. We need those signs occasionally to let us know, to be encouraged that he is with us. All right, a third thing, encouragement. God's name is I am. That's present tense because he's always present. I want you to look at verses 13 and 14. Then Moses said to God, indeed, when I come to the children of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they say to me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? And God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, thus you shall say to the children of Israel, I am has sent me to you. What kind of a name is I am? That doesn't sound like anything that anybody will be named, does it? It almost, we'd say, well, that doesn't make any sense. But there was a reason that, we call him Yahweh in the Old Testament, or Yahweh has been translated Jehovah God. Some call it, he's also had another term called Jehovah Jireh. I'll have you look those up. Well, there's meanings for those different things. God cannot be defined with one simple name, because God is many things. That's why God has revealed himself, and we're calling them encouragements tonight, what he's like, who he is. But he gave a simple answer that describes what we need to know about him. He said, tell them I am have sent me. You see, every nation that practiced idolatry had a name for their gods. They had a name for them. In fact, when the children of Israel many years later would be fighting the nations in Canaan to drive them out, all of them had names for their gods. And the name for their gods told you something about their character. Men named their own creations. And you see, all idolatrous gods were created by men. So they gave them names. Moses is curious, and he felt the people would want to know, well, what's God's name? God is the eternal one. He never had a beginning. He will never have an end. So he said, I am. He always is present, because he always has been. He always will be. He is the omnipotent God, which means all-powerful. He is an omniscient God, which means he is all-knowing. He's all-powerful. Moses and Israel should have been encouraged by God's name. The very fact that your God is present. Anybody else with a thought or question on this? Comment. All right. 3 encouragements so far from God so that you can know about him and be encouraged about his character. There's a 4th one I want you to notice. Here's the 4th one. Verses 15 through 18. God is personal, and he sends people to other people with his word, with his message. Look with me as we begin at verse 15. Moreover, God said to Moses, thus you shall say to the children of Israel, the Lord God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial to all generations. Go and gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, the Lord God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob, appeared to me, saying, I have surely visited you and seen what is done to you in Egypt. And I have said, I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, and the Hittites, and the Amorites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, to a land flowing with milk and honey. Then they will heed your voice, and you shall come, you and the elders of Israel, to the king of Egypt. You shall say to him, the Lord God of the Hebrews has met with us. And now, please, let us go 3 days' journey into the wilderness, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. That was a request he told them to make to Pharaoh. Tell him, our God has told us to come out in the desert and worship him, so we need to take a 3 days journey. It'll take us 3 days to get far enough out in the wilderness where he wants us to go. Everything that God said to Moses here points to the fact he is personal. You ever heard anybody say God is a person? Now, I don't mean God is a man, but he is a person just like you and I. We're created in his image. We are persons. He is a person. We can talk. We can communicate. We can hear. We can listen. We can make signs. We are creative. He is creative. He is personal. And he personally goes to people and talks to them and tells them, I want you to go deliver my word to other people. He has emotions. He has a personality. God has a sense of humor. That's where yours came from him. God speaks for men to hear. That being said, a question for you. What should we take from all these personal details that God gave Moses to say to Israel? What do you take from that? He told him specific things to say to them. What does that tell you about him? He knew. He knew all the details. All right, very good. What else? He had a plan. This also tells me that he's telling him, I'm the God of all generations. Tell them, I was the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and Jacob. I have been watching over you. So he told them specific things that would tell them this was not a surprise to him. He'd been seeing it all along. If God had been watching Israel for 400 years, what's that tell you about you and me and our plight for our piddly number of years on this earth? If he waited to a perfect timing, maybe he's waiting for a perfect timing to intervene in our life for something that's going on. But he's still personal. He's still interested in your personal life. That's the point I want to make. He chooses to use us to speak to others. He promised the goodness of the land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Don't want to go over. You're not saying anything. We'll get to my fifth point. Another encouragement. Verses 19 and 20. God knows beforehand. We need to understand this about God. He already knows beforehand how people are going to respond in situations. Verses 19 and 20. Now, he told him this. You're going to lead the children of Israel out. But he wants to let him know something ahead of time. 19. But I am sure that the king of Egypt will not let you go. No, not even by a mighty hand. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all my wonders, which I will do in its midst. And after that, he will let you go. What's he referring to there? 10 plagues that fell upon Egypt before they allowed Israel to leave. And you remember what the 10th plague was? Death. It took God striking down dead all the firstborn in Egypt for them to finally be humble. Actually, I say them, Pharaoh. He was a one-man boss. For him to be humbled enough to say, go. Not only that, he ordered him, take and get out. So he knows beforehand. Now, he's told Moses this. Moses is to tell the children of Israel, before they get into all the conflicts and all the controversy, you need to know, at first, he's not going to let you go. Now, the minute that Nile River turned into blood, that's the first plague, you'd think. In fact, first of all, he first agreed, but then he changed his mind after the bloody water dried up and everything went back to normal. One plague after another, and we're not going to get into the plagues tonight. You know a little bit about that if you've heard the story. So, once again, let's refresh it. Moses, I know that Pharaoh's not going to let you go unless something mighty happens, inflicting him. He will not consent until he's forced to, is what he's saying. So Moses knew better how to appreciate the information after Pharaoh did refuse. God said this was going to happen. Sure enough, it did. Israel would see God punish Egypt He would see that he was favorable to them. The 10 plagues that fell on Egypt did not fall on Israel. Nothing caught God by surprise. He knows in the future. Another question. How is God's knowledge beforehand an encouragement to you? If he knows beforehand what's going to happen, is that encouraging at all to you? That way you can know he already knew about it. Very good. Anything more? And sometimes bad things happen to his people, but he allows it to happen. But the fact that he knows beforehand, I hope, encourages you that he has that much power, that he can intervene and change things. Sometimes he disciplines us through those things. So true. If he takes you to it, take you through it. That's a great little motto. Thank you. For whom he foreknew, he did predestinate to be called according to his purpose. Thank you. All right, one more encouragement, and I'll let you get out of here. Verses 21 and 22. God gives people favor with other people. That's another encouragement. In your position, whatever it's in, if you're a leader, he will give you favor with the people you're a leader over. If you just people you interact with work, your having Christ in you ought to make people attracted to you. There are things to, let me back up here. Let's read verses 21 and 22. And I will give this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, and it shall be when you go, in other words, when you're allowed. Must have, Kendall. There I am, I'm back. When you go, that you shall not go empty-handed, but every woman shall ask of her neighbor, namely of her who dwells near her house, articles of silver, articles of gold, and clothing, and you shall put them on your sons and on your daughters. You shall plunder the Egyptians. They were saying, go ahead and ask them. I'd like to have that gold bracelet you got there. I'd like to have that silver ring you got there. Here, take it. Get out of here. All our people are dying because of you, they said. So without them doing one thing of warfare, none of the Egyptians lifted a hand. None of the Israelites lifted a hand to fight them. God gave them favor. They were glad to give them of what they, remember they were treating them like slaves. Now the slaves were just getting a little bit of the stuff that all the Egyptians owned. Okay, what that tells us, when God blesses us, people are touched. The Egyptians saw God's hand was superior to their gods that they worshiped. The Egyptians wanted to appease Israel's God. God gives us favor with other people. Concluding, there are things to know about God that serve as giant encouragements to us so that we'll continue in faith. God is present wherever you are. God does give signs to remind you that he's the one that's guiding you. God's name is I am present eternally. Trust me. He gives messages to us through other people. He knows beforehand what people will do. He knows what you will do. He knows whether or not you're going to be faithful to him, that you'll serve him. He blesses with favor from other men. That's it. We're done. Question, comment before we quit. Thank you for your time, your participation. Pray for Sunday. We're going to have a great experience Sunday. We're going to see 2 children be baptized, and we're going to hopefully see God touch other hearts and lives this coming Sunday. Let's stand and be dismissed.